Call to order. The Hawk Creek Watershed District Board of Managers meeting June 11, 2015. All managers are present except Manager Miller. Some managers don't have their microphones on. There. That'd be me. At this point in the meeting, we would ask if any member of the public wanted to address the board in a matter not on the agenda. I don't see any members of the public here, so I'll move on to introduction of new staff.
Hello, my name is Katrina Nygaard. I've had the opportunity to meet some of you at the Planning and Policy Committee. I'm the new planning assistant. I'm working with Becky and James on updating the comp plan. I'm originally from Minneapolis, grew up just by Lake Nokomis in the creek, so I've always had experience in the district, just wasn't aware of it. I moved to Chicago for my undergrad, where I studied geography and environmental studies. And that's where I really got interested in water issues and planning issues. Around the city, they have a combined sewer system there, and so every time it rains, the water dumps right into the lake and into the beaches where children go to swim, where people are growing their fruits and vegetables. And so I started to think about what are the ways that we can deal with these issues, how can we make this environment healthier for everyone that's living in the community. About a year and a half ago, I came back to Minnesota to go to the University of Minnesota for an urban and regional planning master's degree. Just finished that up in May, and so I was able to start full-time here just 2 weeks ago. One thing that I'm really looking forward to here is diving in on the sort of 6 Mile Creek subwatershed plan. My experience in Minnesota and in Chicago is really heavily in community engagement and working with different populations, and so, but I haven't really had a lot of experience with rural and rapidly urbanizing areas. And so I think that 6 Mile will be really exciting. And hopefully we can get a nice, robust process to really make sure that that focal geography is well planned and that the community is really engaged and all the stakeholders views are represented. I think that's sort of all about me. I'm excited to be here and want to thank you all.
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
I'd like
Second?
to add something if possible.
Sure. Is there a second?
Yes, second.
And Manager Shackleton?
In the discussion item, we have on here 2016 budget process, and I had a couple ideas I'd like to throw out and just discuss as a group. One of them related to planning around Painter Creek and 6 Mile Creek, and more specifically Lake Minnetonka, and internal loading. And then the other idea was around education and kind of community events that we have done could potentially be. So I'm envisioning like 11.1 or 2.
Okay. Anything else anyone wants to add or change on the agenda? With that change, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. We have one information item in the packet, the Project Maintenance and Land Management Spring Update from Laura Damjancic. And there were a couple of items of correspondence here. One from the City of Wayzata, which I'll discuss in the President's report, and a notice from the City of Hopkins of their intent to introduce a wellhead protection program. So I will route this letter to staff from Hopkins. The consent agenda has approval of the minutes of the May 28th board meeting. That is the only item. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Under board updates, President's report, I have several items to mention. The City of Wayzata has invited me to represent the Watershed District on a selection committee for a design consultant to work on their lake effect signature project. They're looking to hire an interdisciplinary design team, and that selection committee would meet in July and August. I have indicated my interest, but I am asking that the board would name me as liaison to bring it under the liaison policy that the board has. This would be a review of submissions and narrowing it down to 3 candidates who would then present and interview with that committee, and then the recommendations would go to the Wayzata City Council, which plans to make its decision in September for a finish date on this design of phase 2 of their project in the spring. Manager Olson.
Wouldn't that imply that we're supporting them?
Well, that's why I think it's important to put it under the liaison policy, because it would, that part of that policy says cannot make any representations on behalf of the watershed district. They're asking stakeholders, Wayzata residents, and a number of other professionals to be on the selection committee.
Mm-hmm.
So there'd be no representation of support for the program, merely a participation in the process of selecting.
It's a delicate balance.
It is indeed. It is indeed. And the liaison policy would also require reporting back to this board. So I think it's important to institutionalize it. I can't think of any reason to say no. I think it would be a very interesting process for one thing, and it will let us be involved with understanding of what they might want to do there in Wayzata, their lake effect. Manager Blix.
The only reason I would think to say no would be that being a part of the process doesn't, it kind of implies as though an assent to the whole thing. And we haven't discussed or made a decision about it one way or another as a board. And I think it's fine that we participate, and I think it would be worthwhile for us to do so, frankly. But I just don't want it to be interpreted by the public
Mm-hmm.
and others that it's a tacit approval for the whole thing when we haven't done anything one way or the other about the whole project at all. So I'm
Let me
up in the air on
play
it.
devil's advocate in a
Yeah.
couple of ways. One is that it would be very clear that we would not be taking a position. First of all, I'd love to take a position on, because it's very much in the design stage. They spent several years working up to this point. Now this is just phase 2 to hire a consultant. And secondly, if we flip it around, we ask people from cities and the county and other agencies to participate in our technical advisory committees and policy advisory committees from time to time. And I don't believe that anyone ever thinks that that's an assent to what we're doing.
Yeah, okay.
Then, is there a motion to appoint Ms. Liaison
So
for that
moved.
purpose? Is there a second?
Second.
Further discussion? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. A quick note that, and an email went out today from Ms. Mamayak. The deadline for nominations for the Watershed Heroes categories is June 26th, and the board is invited to a meeting on June 29th to meet with staff to look over those submissions. So look for that email if you haven't seen it yet. And June 30th is the date that is the best manageable date for the tour by the board and CAC of some district projects. The suggested projects are the Long Lake Wastewater Treatment Pond Restoration, Cottageville Park, and the Reach 20 Remeander area. If we left here at 6:30 that evening, we'd have 2.5 hours of daylight, which would get us out to those projects. So we could have a light dinner or snack available here before, as we do with our meetings, and then leave here at 6:30 on the bus.
And that day again?
June 30th.
It's a Tuesday?
Wednesday. Is it Tuesday? Okay.
Tuesday. The day after the Heroes meeting.
Yes. Does that sound okay to everyone? Okay, good. Then one last item, I think I'll mention it now, is that on June 25th, when we actually have planning committee, staff and legal counsel have suggested that we have a one-item board meeting beforehand to approve the general checking account, surety account, and Blake Road checking account, because it's awfully early in the month to do all that on the 18th. It's hard for our contractors and whoever to get their consultants to get their bills into us. Thank you. So the board could meet, just manage those few items, and then adjourn and go into the committee meeting on that evening. I think we'll have a quorum that night. Do I need to have a motion, Louis?
Madam Chair, you as the board president can convene a
All
board
right,
meeting.
I had
so-
forgotten that. Power. So we will have a brief meeting that evening before the committee and board meeting, just to approve checks, basically, accounts. And that's all I have. The next report would be from Manager Olson on the Operations and Programs Committee. We didn't meet this month, though.
So that's pretty quick.
That's the end of that one. And crossing it out. Manager Blix, CAC report?
The CAC met last night and they covered a variety of items. One of the first major items after the report from staff, where Telly just kind of gave them an update of all the things that were coming up in the district, all the various events. The major thing that she went over for them was the opinion survey that we had commissioned, and so she went over that in detail with them, and they had a number of comments about that and just questions about it. The next thing they talked about was the meeting that they had with you and Brian, and the suggestions that were made for their involvement. Excuse me. For the board and the CAC to work more closely together, and a number of the members had different suggestions that to go forward on those ideas. They liked the ones that were presented, and they are going to continue to try and get additional feedback from others and come up with a more detailed action plan to implement some of those things. Then Brett Item went through the cost share projects, and they approved the 3 that were presented to them, and which will then be coming to us at the end of the month. Then they had a significant discussion about the Minnehaha Creek cleanup that's coming up, because Telly was asking them for their involvement in getting the news out to people about that, but also to participate, to work it as kind of staff people as well. So they had a lot of questions about the event and kind of what their role would be. And they put on hold, they were supposed to discuss the Cynthia Creek grant planning process for the upcoming round, but they ran out of time. And so that will be postponed, and as well as they're brainstorming for agenda items for them to discuss in upcoming meetings also was postponed because they just ran out of time. The meeting ended up going until 9 o'clock as it was, so it was fairly substantial. And I don't know, there was probably about, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 of them there, perhaps. So that would be it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The upcoming meeting and event schedule is listed here, and it includes a meeting that isn't strictly ours, but the July 3rd, 23rd Nemo Boat Tour. And in addition to that, there'll be a board meeting on July 30th, which is out past the end of this here. But we have a public hearing this evening and on the release of the annual report of the MPCA, and that is Ms. Christopher.
Good evening, Madam Chair, managers. There are a few items on the agenda tonight related to the district's requirements as a municipal separate storm sewer system, the annual report, the annual public hearing, and then Mr. Dietrich will be requesting approval of policies to ensure that the district's rules conform to the revised MS4 general permit. Just to give a brief background, the district is regulated as an MS4 because we're the drainage authority for 8 public drainage systems. And as an MS4, the district is required to have a stormwater pollution prevention plan. The district's SWIP, for short, is included in the packet and outlines how the district is meeting the requirements of the permit, including the 6 minimum control measures, which are education and outreach, public participation, illicit discharge detection and elimination, construction stormwater runoff control, post-construction stormwater management, and pollution prevention and good housekeeping. The MS4 permit requires that the district hold at least 1 public hearing annually to allow for public input on the district SWIP. This hearing was noticed in the Star Tribune and on the district website. No comments have been received thus far. Also in the packet is the 2014 annual report to the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, which reports on the district's progress towards implementing its SWIP and any changes that have been made. This is due on June 30th, and there is an RBA requesting the board's authorization to submit that report. And I will take any questions.
First, let's have a motion to, I'm sorry, this is only a public hearing at this point. All right. Are there any members of the public here who wish to speak? I see none. We'll close the public hearing. Do managers have questions at this point? I see no questions. Thank you very much, Ms. Christopher.
Oh, well, so I am also asking for action, or that it be forwarded to consent, the RBA for the annual report.
You're absolutely right. I read that and forgot. Is there a motion to approve this, send it forward to the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
We have no permits this evening. Mr. Dietrich, resolution to adopt a rule policy for MS4 compliance.
President White, managers, before the board this evening is requesting advancement to the consent agenda is the adoption of rule policy for MS4 compliance. Essentially what the adoption entails is rule interpretive policies for MS4 compliance in lieu of rule revisions. This matter was previously before the board in August of 2013, where the board authorized staff to pursue an MS4 application with the MPCA. And just to provide a brief overview of the history of the MS4 that Ms. Christopher touched on, in August of 2013, the MPCA revised their general NPDES permit for MS4s, of which the district is a mandatory MS4. And as an MS4, we are legally obligated to apply for coverage and update our SWIP accordingly. And that coverage began on March 17th, 2014. Our essential duty as an MS4 require the district to develop, implement, and enforce regulatory mechanisms, and these are such things as illicit discharge detection and elimination systems, site stormwater runoff, and post-construction stormwater management. And in an effort to assess our compliance with the MS4 updates, WANC did a comparative analysis of district rules versus the MS4 updates, and those complete findings are in the packet. But in summary, essentially the finding was that district rules are equivalent to the MS4 updates and maintain the same intent of protecting water quality. And then through continuing administration and enforcement of the district stormwater management rule, the district will be in compliance with the MS4 updates on a watershed basis. And then overall, district rules were consistent with the MS4 updates. However, there were certain criteria that were not explicitly addressed within the erosion control and stormwater management rule. And those 2 items that were identified involved the installation of sedimentation basins, and that's housed under the erosion control rule, and the limitations and restrictions on infiltration techniques, and that's housed under the stormwater management rule. Staff actively practices, reviews for, and enforces these mechanisms. However, they're not explicitly stated in our rules. So in an effort to bridge the gap between the two criteria that we ID'd, staff coordinated with Smith Partners in exploring mechanisms that would supplement district rules and bring them into compliance with the MS4 updates. There's a guidance document that was published by the MPCA, which basically allowed for a variety of options for bringing us into compliance, and that included contract language, permits, standards, policy, and pretty much any enforceable mechanism. And by that guidance document, our Smith Partners and the district assessed that the adoption of policy is an acceptable supplement to bring district rules in compliance with MS4 updates. So staff is therefore proposing the adoption of the rule or the policies outlined in the resolution in lieu of rulemaking, and then policy would be enforceable through the permitting process and then also through conditions that were placed on permits.
Thank you. Before discussion, is there a motion?
Move forward this to the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions of Mr. Dietrich? The question occurred to me, two questions occurred to me. One is, when an applicant comes in, how do they learn what all the rules are, whole package of rules, or not rules in a loose sense, requirements?
Essentially, the district would obviously work with the applicant to explain what the rules are, but when these come into play is when you have sites that are over 1 acre. So these are the larger developments, and very rarely some single-family homes that have an acre of disturbance on them. So that's when these would come into play.
Okay. And so that a staff would just have documents or verbally tell a person what all the requirements were? How would you do that?
Well, we would inform them, and we have some rule specific documents that explain and outline what the requirements are, and then it is the applicant's responsibility to basically conform to the MPCA standards if the site was over 1 acre. So where we may not necessarily require stormwater for a specific site that is over 1 acre, they are required by NPDES standards under the MPCA to provide stormwater.
Thank you. In the last paragraph of the memo from your office, Mr. Smith, there's a sentence about the MPCA not requiring or firmly approving. Does that have significance for us?
Madam Chair, can you just point me to the sentence?
I
Is this on the
can't
second
get a
page?
signal. It's in the last paragraph, so yes. I can't open my document.
The memo?
right now. Oh, here we go.
Louis, I also have a copy of it.
I have the memo, I just got.
Oh, it's the last, the parenthetical, the very last sentence of the next to last paragraph. This recommendation is made cognizant of and notwithstanding the agency's indication that it does not require and will not formally approve any such submission from NCWD.
Yes.
Should that be something to think about? I don't understand why it's there yet.
Madam Chair, managers, what I believe this reflects is that there was some exchange or discussion with the PCA about the approach that we were taking and a desire to have the PCA bless it. And I think that the response we got was, we don't do that. So we're left with your recommendation from your staff, the engineer and the attorney, that we think this is a reasonable approach, and given that the guidance offers that you can use other mechanisms, regulatory mechanisms, we think so long as this is understood as a policy that is going to be consistently applied when it's triggered, that this meets those requirements.
All right, thank you. Are we ready to vote? All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Thank you. Item 10.3, Resolution 15-051. Ms. Schaffler.
Madam President, managers, tonight the board is requested to authorize a contract with Wink Associates to update the operations and maintenance manual and to develop a capital reinvestment plan We reviewed this at the May 28th board meeting. At that time, the board had asked for some more information on the value of the proposal and some more details of what it all would take. So just some background, the board has identified this as a need to make sure the district is planning well for its management and maintenance of its past projects. And accordingly, the Project Maintenance and Land Management Department this year did identify the need to budget for it and do this work in the 2015 work plan. So just a bit of progression since the last manual was developed in 2000. The Project Maintenance and Land Management Department has progressed pretty significantly since 2000. In 2009, the decision was made to actually bring the work of that program in-house and hire a full staff person. And in 2012, again, absorbed a lot of the land management duties of the land conservation program. And then more recently has inserted itself into collaborating with the planning group as we develop projects to make sure that they're being planned efficiently and well thought of ahead of time to make sure maintenance is efficient on the back end. So as we've progressed with the program itself, so have our capital projects and the complexity of those. A prime example of that is the Reach 20 project. So not only do we have vegetation management, now we are managing a boardwalk, education pavilion, a pedestrian bridge, along with some creek remanders. So complexity to that and understanding how they all tie together and being able to maintain them all. So in 2000, WENC created this operations and maintenance manual. And at that time, we had built approximately 32 facilities. Currently, as this report reads, it is more of a report. It doesn't have the level of detail necessary to be a valuable kind of guiding document for the program as we've progressed. So what we've done is performed a gap analysis. And I hand out a map. So this map corresponds to attachment A in your packet of the project list. I'll pull it up here as well. So what you'll see in attachment A in your packet and also on this map is that since the 2000 manual, we've built 42 additional projects and have also acquired over 20 district properties. So the need is to update to develop a more informative and step-by-step guide for how to inspect and maintain our projects and protocols to do that, and really develop a good guiding document for the program and take out the institutional knowledge that to date the program's really relied on, and standardized protocols and also identified ways to plan for the future. So the update itself will include design plans and other pertinent information. So if a person's unfamiliar with a project, can come in, understand why the project was developed, how it was built, and what maintenance needs correspond to the project. Working through the update, WENC staff and district staff will develop a series of standard O&M protocols driven by project type, and recognizing that although we may have a lot of stormwater ponds, each site has its own nuances. So for example, the Lake Calhoun outlet structure is a confined space outlet structure where your Twin Lake one is a weir. So understanding those different dynamics, and then of course there's a lot of different vegetation management protocols at each site. Then we'll take that information and translate those protocols into indirect and direct activities. So consultant and contractors' time and expenses to maintain our sites, and then also accounting for staff time to inspect and oversee all of that. Then lastly, the O&M manual identified the likely time frame for incurring those costs for each project, and then use that information to transition into creating a capital reinvestment plan. So the second part of the scope. In developing a capital reinvestment plan will allow the district to cyclically plan and invest in the district sites by providing a framework for the short and also the long-term budgeting and future needs of the district. So moving forward, when planning and projects brings a project to the board, at that time we'll provide a well-rounded understanding of what the long-term costs will be to maintain that project, and then complement that with adding that to the overall capital reinvestment plan. So the board will then have a full understanding of, okay, this project individually is going to cost us this much in the long run, and then how that adds on to the overall cost for the board and levy for that program by itself. So with that, the scope can be reviewed in attachment B. So if you take it in its simplest terms and break down the 45,490 and divide that by 82 sites, it's about $550 per project to develop all the protocols and then also develop a reinvestment plan for each project. So with that, I am asking for action tonight, and I can take any questions.
Before we discussion, is there a motion to take this from the table?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Questions or discussion? Manager Calkins?
When the district approves a project and it's constructed, over time, things may change. I mean, especially plantings may change. Things may die. Is there a policy or a plan to try and maintain the project as it was designed, or if changes are made, how are those changes reviewed as that project matures over time?
Yeah, Manager Calkins, that's something I remember we discussed a little bit when we brought back the maintenance policy, and really using the O&M manual to develop somewhat of a kind of a management plan for each project and identify that, and recognizing that as things are always kind of changing, revisiting that every so often. So just as we would with our management plans for district lands, if things are changing or needs are changing or desires are different, we could establish we want to look at it every 5 years and update that accordingly. I think would probably be how I approach it.
And does the district, or will the plan, I guess maybe, is there an intent, and it may already be happening, to track, for example, which plants perform well in projects, which ones survive, which ones don't, so that information can be used in the future?
Yeah, Manager Calkins, managers, that is something that we are kind of looking, we're tracking that and looking for ways to develop that more, and it's kind of a side tangent that we'll be discussing, developing more of a district-wide, potentially, database, and being able to track those and how things are moving, and you really utilizing GIS capabilities to spatially recognize how, if you're looking at like Lake Calhoun, okay, where are we having problems, where are things progressing nicely, and understanding that in more of a spatial context, and being able to, print off a map and go out there and see how the site's changed or how it's progressed.
Okay, I think that would be good information to have,
Yeah,
and each project is different. I know at I think it was Long Lake, we had a lot of cup plant planted there, and people complained about it because it got too tall, which I can understand. It does get tall, but that would be good information to be using for future planning.
Yes.
Not that you wouldn't include cup plant, because it's a good plant, but it would be good information to have and to review as projects are being designed. So.
Yeah, and certainly, and I think within the manual itself, like I said, taking that institutional knowledge and documenting such things like that as obviously a project is built and designed to a certain place, but what's taken place since its implementation and how has it progressed, and documenting that, and this will definitely be a living document, as we add new projects or things change at a project, adding that in. So again, that it's all in one place and it's not all, institutionalized by one person.
Thank you.
Are there other questions for Ms. Schaffler?
I have one for Manager
Yes.
Calkins. How tall is that plant get?
Well, it depends on how wet the site is, but I've seen cup plant that's easily 10 feet tall.
Okay.
I believe it's that tall, that park on the south side of Long Lake, the city park. It's very
Yeah,
tall.
the headwaters, there's a good stand of it as well, right by the dam. So
Okay.
we put out there. The birds are always very happy.
Are we ready to vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Manager
just
Blixt.
to be clear, the action of the board was to approve this
This is
tonight, not to
final
put on the
approval.
consent agenda.
Right.
Manager Blixt.
It's not related to this, but in a way it is, just because I see them on here, and we have talked in the past about having a discussion about our ditches and what we are doing or not doing with regards to our obligations to the ditches, and is it possible for us to schedule that for some upcoming time in the future?
I will work on that.
You know, and I know that it's probably time for us to have a review of our legal obligations with regard to ditches, and in particular in light of the upcoming potential buffer implications.
And we will be having a legislative update in July. It was later than probably typical because of the long session, so there will be that. But I will mark this as something we want to discuss. Did you have a question, Manager Shackleton?
I did not.
Okay. Then let's move on to resolution at item 10.4, and that's Ms. Christopher.
Madam Chair, managers, tonight staff is requesting that this resolution be forwarded to consent for authorization to contract with Wenck Associates to conduct the Mud Lake subwatershed assessment. As you may recall, last fall the district applied for and was awarded a Clean Water Fund grant in the amount of $39,968 to conduct this assessment of the drainage area to the northwest of Mud Lake. That includes portions of St. Bonifacius and Minnetrista. The area was identified through the 6 Mile diagnostic as contributing significant phosphorus loads to Mud Lake, and the city also approached the district about some local flooding and erosion issues that they were having. So the purpose of the assessment really is to identify solutions to try to address these issues. In April, the board authorized execution of the grant agreement, as well as the expenditure of the required $10,000 grant match. Tonight, staff is requesting authorization then really just to execute the contract with Wenck to complete the assessment. Given Wenck's experience in the area through the completing the 6 Mile diagnostic and subsequent monitoring of this drainage area, staff feels they are best suited to complete the work. So again, I'm requesting that this be forwarded to consent, and I will take any questions.
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion or questions? This was a popular item, apparently. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you, Ms. Christopher.
Thank you.
We're on to 11.1, the 2016 budget process. Mr. Erdahl.
Thank you, President White and managers. There is a memo that was drafted kind of in cooperation with staff in your packet talking about the budget process going forward for 2016. I was going to just kind of go, I don't want to read through that memo, but I do want to kind of touch on some highlights from that and then see if there's any questions or suggestions from all of you. In order to meet the September 15th deadline to certify our budget and levy to Hennepin and Carver counties, our staff has formed internal budget teams, and based on the generally positive comments from the prior year's process and presentations, we've developed a plan to work with the Board of Managers to review project and program work plans, assemble the total budgets for the projects and programs, and establish budget priorities and evaluate and set the projected levy. In the past, it's my understanding that the work plans were presented over a series of meetings and then assembled into a total budget package. After discussion with the board president and treasurer last week, staff is recommending some slight improvements to that process for this year's consideration. The primary change would be that all the work plans would be presented to the combined joint committee on July 16th. The plan would be for us to begin with a big picture overview of the 2016 budget and the fiscal impacts of all projects and programs, and then, just like last year, get into more specific details with a focus on significant changes proposed for work plans within each division. And again, like last year, cover memos will highlight the dollars and reasons for significant changes within each work group. The product of this process will be the preliminary recommendation to align the 2016 budget with the target levy, taking into account carry forward, project and program priorities, and financing options. And as somewhat of a side note, not directly related to this, but kind of with a longer term perspective than the 2016 budget, the June 25th Planning and Policy Committee meeting will explore potential guiding principles for future project and program funding options. And we've already discussed some of these things in various forums already, but we'd like to review historical budget versus levy ratios and the use of carry forward for levy reduction, outline potential financing options, evaluate our short and long-term debt capacity for capital projects, and also discuss potential guiding principles for financing options for various programs going forward. And then kind of the final part of that memo is the next steps, which goes through a bit of a chronology of the budget approval and development process, starting with today on June 11th, and then going forward to kind of some of the big milestone moments is things like the September 3rd public hearing, budget approval on the 10th, deadline for the budget and levy certification on the September 15th, and then additional public comment and at the BURP workshop and final approval on December 10th. And I'm happy to respond to any questions as I can. Otherwise, some staff that have been through the process in the past can maybe help us too if you have other questions too.
Thank you, Mr. Erdahl. Are there questions? Andrew Calkins.
What is the target levy?
That's a little bit of what we asked for when we met with the president and the treasurer last week was to see if we could kind of switch the order to start with kind of what amount of levy would be acceptable to the managers and from your perspective to the public, and try to see if we could kind of build the projects that make full and the most effective use of those resources. So kind of as just kind of a moving target that can obviously change based on other input from all of you. I think that Treasurer Miller suggested something like a 5% increase as a target for the coming year, and then we can kind of make adjustments from that going forward. So that wasn't meant as a hard and fast decision, but that was kind of a little bit of a guideline so that we can start internally to make some prioritize different types of projects and programs so that that we can kind of bring that together.
And I could add that part of that discussion was that last year staff came in with work plans and it was, I think, 11%. Would have been an 11% increase if we had just taken them, and the board decided at that point to go down to 5%, which was closer to what the Hennepin County was doing. So that's kind of it might save having to say go back and slash. But as Mr. Erdahl said, there was no attempt to bind the board. It was just a working target number. Andrew Calkins.
Well, I guess if we're going to, it's different than we've done in the past, which isn't a problem. But if we're going to give that signal that, the board is willing to accept a 5% increase in the levy, I think that's something the board should have an opportunity to discuss and formalize that as a board. Because as soon as the number's out there, that's the number that people are going to be shooting for.
The people.
Can I ask just a point of clarification, since I wasn't involved in the process last year? Last year, Manager White, you mentioned that the recommendation was for an 11% increase from the staff, from the total sum of staff work plan efforts.
Yes, the work plans would have come to that. Yeah.
So and there was never a resolution to say 11% was a proper guideline. So I think what we're hoping for is not necessarily it's more of a planning target than a levy target. And I know maybe terminology and words are important in this type of a situation, because I know that the levy is a sensitive issue, and we want to be mindful and transparent about that. But I just thought I'd throw out that I think that in the past it's been, we've come up with far further, way beyond what maybe the capacity would be, and then trying to kind of look at what some of the Hennepin County and others would be kind of using as their levy adjustment for the coming year, and using that as the guidelines. So I think that the landing on 5% was kind of a little bit of a more reasonable target for us to shoot for, but I'm certainly up for if that needs to be formalized in some other way.
And bearing in mind that at the June 25th meeting, there will be a discussion that will help to inform what the board wants to do next year also. Manager Blixt?
The whole idea of setting a levy target number to me has always seemed wrong, in as much as that we have a comprehensive plan and we should look at what our priorities are of things that are most important for us to get done within the district, and base our decision on what's really critical to get done. And from there, then that would guide our discussion of how much we're willing to levy. And at some point on that list, we just have to say, we knock off from the bottom. But it seems that first we have to look at, here are the priorities of what really we think is important to not just us, but to our constituents out there as well. And then from there we use that to guide our process. And so it's hard for me, although as I recall, the staff had presented, the CIP plan for the next few years, and we have that to go by, and we should go back and take a look at that list and have that help us guide our decision making, and have discussions from the CIP list of what are the priorities there that we want to rise to the top or not, and that will, to me, is the better way for us to approach this. It's not a 5%, it's this is what has to be done.
Manager Shackleton?
Can you just help us through the logic that
Mhm.
you guys discussed? Because my instinct says that what Pam is suggesting is kind of the right way to go, where you create the menu and then you kind of lop off from the bottom in terms of what is least aligned with priorities and strategic direction. Is the idea of setting that kind of a nebulous goal of 5 or something % to help staff direct themselves, as opposed to building their entire wish list and working through, a lot, doing more work than would be appropriate for the purposes of our discussion? I mean, I'm just thinking about last year's process, where I remember the looks on people's faces when we started lopping off from the bottom, and it was this realization of, dang, that's not going to happen. And so is the thought of 5% more to provide kind of a top-level guidance?
Yeah, I think the intent is in no way, shape, or form trying to start with a blank slate. This is looking at kind of everything that's been in the comprehensive plan that we're currently operating under the CIP, some of the ongoing multi-year projects that we're currently in the midst of, and looking at some projects going forward. And I think as the scope and scale of some of the projects has increased in terms of kind of having the more focused geography kind of approach, there's some big opportunities in the coming years that we can't possibly afford. And so I think that's when it comes into looking for some alternatives to provide some guidance, so that wish list is a little bit more of a realistic wish list, and so that we're not coming in with $15 million of projects as a starting point, because that isn't the most efficient way to start things. And I just pulled that number out of the air. I didn't do any math for that number. But I think that if you look at some of the projects that could be coming up along the Minnehaha Creek corridor at both ends of that project area, up towards Knollwood and down towards Meadowbrook, and also some of the things on 6 Mile Creek, and maybe some other ideas that we'll hear more about from some of you and from staff as we go through the process. There's some really expensive projects. So I think we were hoping that having that would do a couple things, would add to predictability, because I think in terms of how we operate and how the economy works, the more predictable things are, the more kind of effective that can be. And also to avoid big swings in levy from year to year, so we can look at kind of a leveling of that curve, so it can be kind of a small and predictable amount going forward as well, instead of having one year where we have kind of a huge spike and other years where we might have a drop, and it kind of reduces that level of predictability. And again, these are kind of talking points that we wanted to up for your discussion.
Manager Robbins?
I could be wrong about this, but being I'm the newest member of the board, but I sense that some of these larger projects might be funded with, with indebtedness of some sort, and a referendum, or not a referendum, but a bonding approach, as opposed to it just coming out of the yearly levy. Is that the case or not?
Yes.
Occasionally.
And I think that's one of the discussions, hopefully at the meeting on the 25th of this month, too, the committee meeting, to look at kind of a strategic and a deliberate way that develops some guiding principles to look at the alternatives for financing projects going forward, and not just in land conservation, but maybe in some capital projects as well.
Okay. Manager Bliss?
Well, I was going to say that what you said, Lars, kind of is what I didn't want to happen, which is to say that some of the projects are so large that we're never going to do them, because that may not be true. We may just need to look at the alternative financing. So that's why I think they need to be on the table, and some of them are ones like the golf course projects are ones that we might not want to miss the opportunity for, because we're not gonna have the opportunity again. And so that's why I think it's really important that we lay them all out there and be able to take a look at them as a whole before we just kind of start lopping them off, because some of them are ones that the board may choose to just forge ahead on, because we have come up with a different way of funding it. And then I also wanted to point out, since I just sat through the review last night that Tully did of the
Public opinion survey.
the thing that we commissioned, and I was reminded again that 67% of the group that we polled said they'd be willing to pay another $20, a year, and 87% said they'd pay another $10 a year. So, by and large, our constituency, it seems, out there is willing to pay for an increase in their property taxes, and we want to probably take that into account as well, if there are projects that we think are important enough for us to do that.
Manager Colvin?
Two things. We've had the discussion in the past about should we try and maintain a steady levy, or should we have a levy that fluctuates? And I think generally people have indicated that they would be comfortable with a levy that fluctuates, though we've never gone there. We've tended to try and keep the levies fairly stable, and in fact in the past few years we've tried to keep them from growing very much at all. And I don't really know what the best answer to that question is, but we're talking about two very different ways of looking at the budget. And if you're going to have a budget that fluctuates because you have a priority project that happens to come up, then the idea of having a 5% increase doesn't fit that model at all. Looking at it the other way, though, if you're looking at trying to keep a levy that's fairly steady, I think it's also problematic to assume there's always going to be an increase in the levy. I think that's a bad rut for any body to get into, to think it's just automatically going to be an increase. That's not very good budgeting, and it's not very good planning from the strategic perspective. But it tends to be the place where most government entities are. So I'm not sure that either one of them is a valid model. You can certainly have targets to shoot for, and it's a discussion the board should have, I think, as a part of the budgeting process every year. But I'm not convinced that it's a good model that you want to set in stone and say this is the way we're going to do it. So that's one thing. I'm a little bit concerned that there will be a whole lot of stuff to be presented and discussed on the 25th, and I'm not sure we can do that in one night. I'm assuming that people have thought about that and thought it through, but just a discussion like this alone could take up a very large chunk of time. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. I'm glad to see the CAC is in here. I don't think the CAC last year actually got to comment on the budget and levy until it was pretty much set. So it's good that they're on this list, although it's quite late in the process, because it's essentially they have the one time to look at it before it has to be submitted. And maybe a way to get around that is to invite them to be at the meeting on the 25th, or if we have additional meetings, that they would be invited to be there to listen, and then it gives them an opportunity they'll be better prepared when they actually have the chance to review it at their meeting. But I think their involvement and comment is very important, so it's good to see that they're in there.
Just a point of clarification, it's July 16th, which is kind of the target date for the presentation. So the 25th, we'll talk about the financing options at the Planning and Policy Committee meeting, but then it will be on the 16th that we're hoping to get through the work plans. And I think that we just internally with staff, we've talked about if we have some flexibility built into the schedule going forward, so that if that does stretch into kind of future meetings, there's still that opportunity to do that and still complete our tasks in the timeline.
I'm not going to follow my sword over this. I don't think it's such a big, thing, but it's a way of trying to make the process more predictable and manageable. And I could see that it could go the other way. That last year the work plans came in at +11, and we said please reduce it to 5. It could come in at 5, and the board would say please expand it to 11, and it could go either way. So it's not like it's binding one way or the other. And about the CAC, I think last year was the first time they had seen the budget at all. So I was very proud of that last year. And we had a motion our last meeting to specifically invite them. And so part of that intent is to let them know in advance what those agendas are going to be, so that they have a chance to send members to committees or board meetings that are particularly interested in those issues. So that's a very good point. We'll certainly follow up with that. That's all. Manager Shackleton?
I kind of agree with Jim in the sense that there's a value to having predictability in our budgeting process, and by establishing a target, that's what it is, it's a target. And you can hit it, you can go high, you can go low, but it's a target, it's something to work towards. I do think 5% is a reasonable amount to increase by. It gives it's a predictable amount, which is not to say that we always need to be growing. But I do think that it gives flexibility for growth. It takes into account additional bond servicing if we go that route. And I'm not saying we are, but if that's necessary, we build some flexibility, and it allows us to think larger. And if we do want to go beyond that and see that that's a worthwhile direction to go while looking at the work plans, it does help focus staff's work on the front end. Just in talking about it, it seems like a reasonable path to take. I'm not wedded to a number in particular, but 5 is a round number.
I think it's a pretty healthy situation to be in, where you can establish some forward momentum, but you're not crazy. And if we still have a project out there that just has to be done, has to be initiated in the next year or two, we do have a methodology at our disposal to make that happen. So I think it's a good solid position to be in.
Manager Blix?
I'll just say that the reason that I have misgivings is that I have a vague recollection from that CIP plan for the numbers coming up that are really, there were a number of projects on that list that I think we all agreed are all good projects that far exceed 5%. I mean, as I recall, there was, some up at the 15% years at the 15% range. And that's why I think, there are so many projects on that list that I think we all think are important, that I want to make sure that we all are in agreement on which ones we're going to eliminate as a group. So that's part of why I really want to make sure that we don't turn that over to the staff, that we are participants in the process of eliminating those projects.
And if I might just add, managers, that there's other options beyond just elimination of projects too. I think that we can look at some of those larger projects and look at phasing them over multiple years and looking at some other sources of revenue to help fund them. And so that's kind of all part of the mix of discussion. And I think you're right. There are some ambitious programs ahead.
Yeah.
Did you want to add anything to that, James?
Mr. Whisker?
Just briefly, I think we've talked about internally, specifically Manager Blick's concerns, and I think a lot's been said about the idea behind a target. And basically where we're at right now, I think, as an organization, is there's always more work than there is money. Mm-hmm. And so last year, the entire, if you want to call it a wish list, but all the opportunities that are available programmatically and from a capital projects perspective were laid out in front of the board as these are things that are, shovel ready. These are things that are implementation ready from a program perspective. And the board didn't prioritize that work. The board set a cap and said, staff, come back with options for how to finance to this number and how to delay projects that maybe can be pushed out and configure programs differently. So elements that, in a perfect world we'd like to do, but maybe aren't as high priority as this program element over there, bring back a suite of recommendations to get to 5%. And we're essentially talking about the exact same process, but just knowing up front what the board's appetite would be, because on July 16th, I think what we'd like to do is bring the entire suite of program and project options, but with a very rough projection or recommendation on how we can get to a target. So here's everything that you can do. You've said 5% or 7% or 0%. Here are all the things that if you wanted to hit 5%, you would not be able to do based on what we think are priorities, and that would facilitate a board discussion in July rather than August or September on what the priorities are. So it's in no way, shape, or form intended, I think, for staff to not bring work for consideration. It's to bring the work for consideration with some thinking already behind what the priorities are, so that board can have a really meaningful discussion earlier in the year, because as we get more and more constrained and the projects get larger and we need more creative financing options, we need August and September to figure out, if you want, the kitchen sink over here, we have to go back and spend some time really figuring out how to get from 5 to 11 through creative financing and other options. So that was, I think, it's not wildly divergent from last year. You'd still see all the work. It'd just be previewed earlier in the year with a recommendation on how to pay for things through delays, use of carryover, whether or not we're going to incur capital project debt, those sorts of things.
Manager Olson.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you clarified that because I am interested in the things we can't afford. I'd like to see the bigger plate. And because there's ways we could creatively partner with people and through grants and through joint expenditures with cities and municipalities that can help out. So it's what I didn't want to see is you folks see the 5% package in what you get, and then everything else is.
I think the intent is to sort of approach this from both ends, where staff's job is to think really critically about all of the available options for implementation and bring you as much that could be done next year as possible, given the capacity that we have and where programs are and what they're ready to do, and then have the board guide, what the financial thresholds are, and then come up with a package to get as much of that work done within that financial cap. So sort of working it from both sides.
Right.
And taking into account other sources of funding, the mechanisms of funding as we go along.
Right, and on June 25th, we talked about, Lars had outlined bringing in a whole bunch of different data points from some of our financial consultants so that we can look at the funding sources that are available. Manager also mentioned partnerships, grants, direct levy, appropriations, and debt are kind of the main sources. How you use those different sources across different projects and programs becomes a little bit of a strategic exercise and is good guidance for the future and helps us think about how to do more with sort of less direct financial impact through the levy, because you're probably not going to incur debt to run a monitoring program, to run a regulatory program. That might be restricted to a different suite of activities like projects or something else. So how you begin to distribute and use those different funding sources, the principles behind that starts to guide what we can do within a limited, whether it's 5% or 0% or 11%, guides how we can put things together. So that discussion's intended to take place in June to start to begin to frame how we use the monies that are available to us, and then we bring in all of the work with some idea of what our target might be, using those different sources to get there.
Manager Coughlin?
I think the reality is that we want to have a process that is flexible, but it again needs to be a process that's forward-looking, because when we start talking about different ways of financing projects, when we talk about projects that we know are going to have a very large price tag, then having a process of prioritizing things and having that strategy that looks way into the future, which we've to some degree moved a little way away from right now, becomes even more important to determine how are we going to do that project, if it's going to be a multi-phase kind of a thing or something like that. So I think we have to keep that in mind. And the reality also is that there's always going to be more to do than the money that's available. I'd love to go on a $72,000 trip with the Smithsonian this year, but it ain't going to happen. And that's not a bad thing, that's just the reality. So I wouldn't look at the fact that yeah, we have a lot to do and there isn't enough money to do it as a bad thing. It's just the way things are. Mm-hmm. And you have to work within those parameters, but you still have to keep your eye on the goals that you're trying to achieve. And again, that involves some long-term thinking and strategizing, which is an important part of the budget process, not just this year, but for coming years.
Are we set? Thank you very much, Mr. Urgel. And then 11 point, well, the next item on the agenda was your addition, Manager Shepperton.
Thank you. So we are kind of embarking on this 6-mile investment, and we're in the process of doing work on Painter Creek. A couple months ago, my boss asked me, so if you're doing work in Reach 20, how does that help hot lake, high water, my daughter swimming. And, you know, the quick answer is, well, no. It definitely increases the water quality of what's going downstream, but the quick answer is no. And interestingly enough, today NPR had just this afternoon did a story on clues to water quality in bottom of the lake. And St. Croix Watershed was doing some analysis. And so what I want to just raise tonight is the concept of we're doing work on these ditches that are on our map here to increase the water quality that flows into the lake, which will reduce the external loading to a certain extent. My question is there something that we can do to reduce the internal loading? And I'm excited to see Mr. Panzer here because I know that I've heard rumor of a past study, and looking at our website, we had some internal load management plans from 2007 that were extraordinarily vague in the sense that they talked about reducing phosphorus loading, and that's about as far as they went. And so I would like to explore I'd like to propose that our staff explore the idea of balancing internal and external loading into Halstead's Bay and Jennings Bay, and whether it's worth going down that path. Because if there is a way to reduce internal load as we are reducing external loading, it seems like a worthwhile project in the abstract. That's one idea that I had.
Open for discussion.
Having been there, done that, I would invite Mr. Panzer to come up and to be able to talk about what we did, because we did explore it extensively for Jennings Bay. So come on up and tell them why
you don't get to do that. I get to do that. Mr. Panzer, can you help us?
Madam Chair and managers, I think there's plenty of opportunity to explore. Well, let me say it this way: there's lots of opportunities to reduce internal loading that fit with meeting water quality goals across the district. In Peanut Creek Peanut Creek has been studied since before I got out of college, and you always end up at the point where you have to do something with the internal load in Jennings Bay to meet the water quality goal, even if you drastically shut down the external load. And I think Halstead is probably in that category as well. It's just the nature of Parley and Mud Lake that they're going to be very difficult to work with to meet water quality goals there, and I think they are big contributors of the internal load to Halstead's Bay. And we're learning more about that as time goes on. But the problem with internal loads, as I see it, is invariably you're always looking at some kind of a approach that isn't all that palatable to the public. They're wary of it. It's a lot of times it's a chemical kind of a treatment. They don't like the sound of that. There are hurdles to get over there, but from a cost standpoint, internal load projects often are very cost effective too. If your goal is to take phosphorus out of the system, it's a very things like the alum treatment and the alum injection are pretty cost effective in doing that. I think another thing that we've learned is that you kind of have to look at internal load projects as not as a solution, but as a management practice, where it's you have to keep at it. It's not just a one-time thing. And so, I don't know, we've looked at Painter Creek and Jennings Bay, we've looked at a lot of different ways to do that. We even looked at dredging the entire bay to reduce the internal load and reduce the organic nature of the bottom sediments. But it's tens of millions of dollars to do that, and I think we've pretty much shown that through borings. We took borings on the ice over the winter in deep sediments, shallow sediments, and in places there we went down 15 feet into the sediment and there was absolutely no change in phosphorus concentrations in the sediment. So I mean, you could take that 15 feet off and there'd be absolutely no change.
So I guess my question is, if we were to dramatically reduce the internal loading, have you modeled what kind of effect that would have on the lake?
Yes.
And what does that look like?
In a lot of cases we have.
Sure. But like, what does that look like?
What does it look like? Well, every body of water is different. Jennings Bay is quite a ways away from its water quality goal. Others are closer, but so in some cases you don't have to do these drastic things. It's more of a less dramatic approach. But in Jennings, it's going to take something very dramatic. Even if you would say shut down the external load by 50 or 60 or 70%, you're still going to have to probably do a total lake treatment with alum to get that bay to respond.
I guess, once that bay were to respond, what would that look like? That's kind of...
Well, you would have better clarity and better, metrics in terms of monitoring what's going on in the lake.
Algae would drop.
Would there be a net benefit to residents around it?
Certainly. And there would be indirect benefits to bodies of water that Jennings Bay drains into. We've shown that as well. There'd actually be changes in the water quality.
Although their milfoil would increase.
Yeah.
They would all of a sudden, they don't have milfoil now, and they would all of a sudden have milfoil. And so there has been discussion with some of the residents around there who said we'd rather have dirty water and no milfoil. So right. I think it would be a question that you'd have to ask the residents again what their preference was.
Yeah. So my intent is not to waste money on this creek work if we're not going to, if we're going to do work on these creeks just to make them look prettier, and it's not going to have a measurable effect downstream, begs the question of why invest the money upstream. And I think there's a merit to having a conversation about how do we actually help establish balance here. And if we're just going to write off bays because there's internal loading and leave it at that, I agree that residents would ultimately have to be engaged without a doubt. But the idea of a big project that would cost tens of millions of dollars doesn't really scare me, in the sense that if there would be a way to get support from the state, if there'd be a way to get support from the federal government to help better water quality, which we've seen through our baseline survey, people actually do support. I think it's worth kind of nibbling around the edges, see whether it's worth investigating doing a $10, $20, $30 million project to clean some bays when they're the receiving bodies of work that we're going to invest $10, $20 million upstream.
Well, I think like in Jennings Bay, I mean, there's no silver bullet, really.
Yep.
Halstead's Bay and 6 Mile Creek, I think, you know, the board needs to look at that in terms of probably doing projects out there for decades. And one of them might be strictly an internal load management, or maybe it isn't. Maybe you're going to learn a lot about how carp move around and how they affect water quality. You know, maybe that's where you spend your money. But, you know, by improving buffers, restoring wetlands, maybe restoring natural hydrology and that kind of thing, all of that adds up to the end result. But I mean, there's no single one way to do it. There's just no silver bullet.
I get that. I just feel so reluctant to invest so much upstream without doing anything downstream.
Manager Calkins?
It depends on what you're spending your money on, and that gets, Pam's right, and Mike is right, we have had many discussions about internal load on a variety of water bodies, including the Water Commission, when we were talking about Lake Nokomis, and carp were an issue there, and the carp removal program there was a part of that. So the district has I think in all of its projects, has been aware of internal loading and its contribution, and looks to reduce the external loading and then deal with the internal loading usually at the end of the process. And in some cases it's feasible, and in other cases it's kind of a conundrum of how you're going to deal with it. But it's an important issue. It's a fascinating issue, I think. But it points to the complexity. But again, it depends on how you're measuring water quality and how you're defining water quality. And I have to put out a word of caution that if I remember correctly, the survey of the public, when they were thinking about spending money on water quality, they weren't thinking about algae. They were thinking about drinking water. So that's a problem. And I don't think we can base. We have to be careful about the assumptions that we make based on that information. But Pam is right, is that if you increase the clarity of water in Jennings Bay, you're going to get more milfoil, you're going to get more aquatic plants. I won't call them weeds, although the public would. You're going to get more aquatic plants, and some people would like that, and some people wouldn't like that. So that's a discussion you have to have. But I think it also highlights the value of the new grading system that we're working on. Because it does, to me, make sense that you would restore wetlands upstream in 6 Mile or Painter. And there are reasons you would do that would have nothing to do with what the quality of water in Halstead's Bay. So it's complicated, and that's why I think it's very important for these systems, wherever you draw the line, and the whole watershed is a system, but we tend to break it up into pieces. Wherever you draw the line, that you have that strategic perspective of what your end goal is, and why you've chosen that goal, and how you're going to get there, and how much money are we going to spend on it this year, and how much are you going to spend on it next year. And those are the kinds of things where the district has done a great job in the past, I think, of being innovative. I think it'll be interesting to see how it works, but I think the sand filter for going for Dutch Creek is a great thing. And I think there's more places where we could use that kind of technology. I was reading something the other day. There's a similar technology that's building up now with biochar, and using biochar to capture phosphorus, which opens up a whole different perspective, in that now you're getting into the whole carbon sequestration thing, and you're combining two different things. So I think the district has been well aware of this, and will continue to do that. and we just need to find more innovative ways to address those issues. But it comes down to the cost thing too. We did talk about dredging Jennings Bay.
Reluctantly.
And for some reason, the term actually $90 million sticks in my mind. I don't know why, and it may be completely wrong, but that number for some reason sticks in my mind.
Well, I did one estimate of 27 million, and then I looked at a Japanese technology where you didn't have to dewater the slurry. It was you'd pull it up onto a barge, and it was compressed and all this stuff, and then they'd exude these big tubes of stuff. Anyway, that was closer to 90 million. That was pretty expensive, but a lot tidier.
Scary number.
Mr. Whisker?
Just a little bit of context to help the discussion with regards to 6 Mile and the planning work that we're doing and how it might relate to Halstead's, which is at the end of 6 Mile, and the board's identified as a strategic geography or a focal geography. Obviously, the comprehensive plan lays out or laid out a capital improvement program, and by and large, just to sort of compare and contrast our history against where we are today, the capital improvement plan was laid out by identifying water quality goals for lakes and then figuring out how many pounds of phosphorus need to be removed to achieve sort of an old definition of water quality, and then saying if we need 1,000 pounds for Lake X, we need a pond that does 200 pounds, okay, now we need 5 more ponds. And then all of those projects sort of got shuffled up into a deck, and we were doing projects all over the place. And generally the philosophy behind the CIP, if you look from 2007 to 2017, I think reflected some of the philosophy of the board, that we would focus first on restoring the watershed and managing the landscape and restoring hydrology before we then subsequently moved inside lakes and started managing internal load, because of all the internal load projects were pushed out in our CIP to the very end, or they were on an unfunded list. Now, as we initiated work within the 6 Mile Creek subwatershed following the CIP, we looked at things like Turbid Lake. We purchased the Halverson Dimmler property. We looked at work around the west side of Parley Lake, and some of those projects, we did the feasibility and they weren't successful because of, the other one was down by Wasserman because of local politics, not being timed right with infrastructure investments, inadequate sort of integration with landowner goals early on. And so we decided that we would change kind of our planning framework and look at things more holistically. But as those projects came up, routinely the board would ask, when we do this project, when we do Halverson Dimmler, what are we doing for Halstead's Bay, which is on the downstream end, and how does this all work together? So the question kept coming, how does the system work together? Plus doing these incremental projects isn't really working. And if you look back at the resolution that authorized the 6 Mile diagnostic, all of that was embedded as rationale for why we should take a systems approach, so that as we move forward in implementation, we could kind of be academically authentic about when we do a project in the upper part of the watershed, is it for Halstead's Bay, or is it for local protection and improving ecological integrity in the upper watershed? And by and large, the diagnostic showed that there's a functional water quality break coming out of Lunston. So Parley and Mud Lake and Halstead are essentially a unit. Everything upstream of Lunston, if you do improvements, is for restoration or improvement of impaired waters up there, or protection of existing water quality, or restoration of the watershed to make sure it doesn't one day have a negative impact downstream. Parley and Mud were found as shallow lakes to be devoid of vegetation, dominated by carp, poor water quality, and sending dissolved phosphorus downstream into Halstead Bay. So that's an engine that's driving poor water quality in Halstead. That's about 50% of Halstead's problem, ballpark. The other 50% comes from inside Halstead's Bay. And right around that point in time, the watershed district, before we'd done the big diagnostic, we had also, the board had commissioned a feasibility study to look at not dredging, but an alum injection system to treat bad water quality coming out of Parley and Mud, and pull bad water out of Halstead and treat it and put clean water back in, which was about a $10 million system, capital. And something that Minnetrista generally supported, the city of Minnetrista supported, they saw some Clean Water Legacy grants for, and it precipitated a discussion on internal load management, a policy discussion, and a policy was set by the board on how we would tackle it. But the discussion generally went the direction of, to fix Halsteads, you could do 30 years of shallow lake management, fisheries management, and managing Parley and mud, and then do the big, internal load project for Halstead, or you could do both at the same time to show immediate results while managing the ecosystem for 30 years. And generally where things were left off is that we're going to embark on 6 to 10 months of planning with all of the communities, and that's the communications pieces. This is how your system works. Are we doing both? Are we doing one or the other with regards to Halstead, Parley, and mud? And so it's just a little bit about the past discussions that the boards had, and the general intent in terms of planning with the communities was to match our what we know are the water resource issues with local priorities and see what bubbled out. And at least the last time we checked and the last time we talked about it, Minnetrista was supporting sort of the dual track approach where you're managing long-term ecology but then also trying to figure out a way for an infrastructure project to deal with internal load.
Manager Olson.
You can't justify a dime in 6 Mile by saying water is changing that's going through the dam. It'll never happen. Because
Grays Bay.
Grays Bay, I'm sorry. Grays Bay, because by the time all those western bays go through the choke points.
I wasn't.
Okay, those are natural clarifiers.
I wasn't.
Okay.
I understand how, I understand the depth of the lake and how things sink out.
Yeah.
I was talking actually about the bay itself.
Okay.
About trying to get the bay clean for the purposes of that end of the lake.
Right.
The northwest end of the lake is identified by everybody as worse quality water than the southeast quadrant. And I'm not looking at the downstream receivers. I'm trying to figure out how do we balance internal versus external loads.
And one of the things that has been widely accepted by the folks who live out there is that the carp are a big issue as to why we wouldn't bother yet to work with the internal isolation using alum treatments, because the carp keeps stirring everything up. So it would defeat the purpose of an alum treatment. So once we study the carp and we learn how to stop them from breeding, which is the goal, and the predator fish that eat the eggs and all that kind of a program, and then we see that populations start to fade, then there will be a better time for those treatments. But until we get rid of that problem, it would be a waste of time and money.
Manager Blixt.
All of this leads me to wonder about Jennings and how are we, because we did have some plans and looked at a lot of different programs, and I remember we brought in that consortium of experts. What did we call that?
Charrette.
The Charrette, that came up with a number of recommendations. We flew them in from all over the United States, and they gave us their opinions, and then we never followed them.
Well, you did in the, I don't know what you're calling it, the County Road 26 project, wetland there.
Yeah.
You did follow their recommendations there. But.
So, so are we basically, and so it just brings to mind that, if we haven't dealt with Jennings and we haven't been able to fix that, then why would we commence with the same problem over in Halstead?
6 Mile.
That has even, in my mind, more complex issues than Jennings itself. So maybe we should maybe we should figure out how to deal with the Jennings first. And
Well, my recollection is that we recently had some reports from staff about Peter Creek Jennings concerning the Army Corps of Engineers and changed rules that might make that more probable to happen. Manager Wilkins.
To me, it doesn't matter which one.
they're both losers?
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it doesn't matter to which one. To me, it matters that the district take one of them and deal with it in a holistic fashion and learn from that process and see where you end up. And we've made a commitment to 6 Mile, and I think they're both very complicated systems. So to me, it doesn't really matter which one we do. We've made the commitment at this point. It's just that we need to do a really good job with it.
Yeah, it does sound like we've engaged with local communities and early enough that they understand the scope of short versus long term.
So we've got a good review and reminder here of where we've been.
So the other idea I had was this: we have a creek cleanup in the lower watershed that draws a couple thousand people, removes a couple tons of detritus out of the creek, and if I remember, the last couple times I've looked at participants, they came from Minneapolis and the first and second ring suburbs. We have a Watershed Heroes, which brings in, 150, maybe 200 people that are primarily an internal audience. And then, was it last weekend or the weekend before, there was this Waterfest that the Ramsey Washington Watershed puts on. They do it at Lake Phelan. They bring in their certified vendors who do good water quality work. They do a canoe race. They have fun time for kids, and I got a bunch of email. I saw a bunch of publicity from normal water folk, and then the event happened, and my Twitter feed kept popping up with people that I never would expect to show up at these kinds of things, who were there with their kids or there because they had some project at their house and they wanted to see what they could learn, and it just struck me as something that we could do on the upper watershed, something of an educational nature that brings in a different audience. I know we once did something in Excelsior a handful of years ago. So about the time that I got the email about Waterfest, I also received an email about the Big Island Paddle or something. Excelsior Brewing out of Excelsior does this canoe race around Big Island, and it's a 10K, I think it is, or 10 mile, I forget which, and the proceeds go to the Freshwater Society and someplace else. And just kind of triggered the thought again. We do a lot of work in the lower watershed. We haven't done this kind of public education work in the upper watershed in a long time. We have a different set of capacities now than we did when we last attempted it maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I'm just bringing it up tonight just because we're starting the process of talking about budgeting, and it'd be interesting to explore whether or not Telly should add this into a work plan and try to do something that engaged the public in a different way, that was about water quality and about doing practical things. And want to see what you guys thought.
Manager Calkins?
I think it'd be a great idea. It's something that I've thought about for quite a while. In fact, I actually talked with Telly about it probably 5 years ago, that it would be nice if the district did something that was a bigger, more watershed-wide event. And I'm reminded of in Aspen with the Roaring Fork, they have something like that. Now granted, it's a much smaller watershed than ours and a much less populated watershed than ours. But they have one event where they have, they put little yellow ducks with numbers on them and all that kind of stuff in the creek, and then it's like a race, you know, which one crosses the finish line first. It is incredibly successful and brings in incredible numbers of people. The issue is that it's a huge undertaking, and I think it would be definitely a valuable thing if that's something similar to that the district could consider. But the question would have to be, it's going to take a huge amount of staff time to put something like that together and do it well. And that's the discussion I think that would be worth having, and it would be certainly worth having Telly and other staff be a part of that. Because I know how much work it is to put together the Heroes thing and the cleanup. And in my mind, this would be something that would be much, much bigger than that if you were going to make it work. Because to me, it has two things. It's educational. It brings people together with the idea of, truly the idea of a watershed. And I think you would have to have that and be a part of it. And it would raise awareness of the district and the things that the district does. I think those are some of the key things that it would do. And you can do some incredible things with it. So I think it'd be a really good thing to discuss. But we'd be throwing a huge project in the lap of staff.
If I might, because I had similar thoughts. I know exactly how hard it has been. You know, if recollection serves, we started the creek cleanup in 2007, which was our 40th anniversary, and our 50th anniversary is coming up in, you know, a couple of years. And that first cleanup was small. And I think if something like, in my notes I characterize as the West Metro Waterfest. You know, if there was something, if something were to happen out here, it would start small, but there are some natural partners that we could connect with. We have an event planner on contract, on retainer, and beyond that, I agree. It's a lot of work, and I don't have an answer for how to do that, but I think that there's a gap that's missing that could be filled with an event of this type, and
Here,
Manager Wilson?
thank you. There is several events on Lake Minnetonka every year. One of them is movie night. And thousands of boats show up to see the big screen and turn their radios to the same FM station. And you have 5,000 speakers broadcasting Top Gun or whatever the movie is. And it's fun. It's a great way to get everybody together. And one of the things leading up to the movie is all the sponsors putting their ads up there, spreading the word about what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And so we, back in the LMCD days, we capitalized on our ability to get the message out and that type of a thing. But those are fun times, including fireworks and everything else that go along with it. And Mountain Days has their celebration, and then you got the J.J. Hill and their celebration. So there's lots of events on the lake that bring in lots of boats and all the people with it. And so it you know, strategically there's lots of success in terms of other venues, and it'd be interesting to see if we could do something like that. Because frankly, the thing that we do the most is the NEMO event on the QE, mm-hmm. where we train all the local government folks, and so it's not a bad idea.
Yeah, and I don't have an event in mind, really.
Right.
Just like there's an opportunity there, and I can imagine Telly's reaction would be, "Oh my God, how am I going to do this now?" On top of everything else. Right.
It's
Mr. Panzer.
It's not big and splashy or anything, but I've always thought that working with like middle school science teachers to develop curricula that would maybe be the study of restored wetland or wetland diversity, where you'd have, you know, stations, like sort of like Spring Peeper maybe, where you can walk around out there and look for plants and stuff like that.
We
I
do
mean,
that.
science teachers are just looking for that kind of thing all the time. Now, it's not a big splashy thing, but over time, there's really an educational thing going on there.
I remember Leslie doing that a lot at one point. Are we still doing that?
Working with school groups?
Yeah.
Not to my knowledge.
My understanding is that the school audience has kind of come and gone over the years for the watershed district. That sometimes it's been a big focus group, and some other times it's been kind of a diminished focus. So right now, I think there's a few schools we work a lot with. We're developing some programs around the Reach 20 boardwalk and some of those things. And I know our staff has been out there just recently with some school groups. There's the Hilltop Elementary School in Mound uses the Watershed District's property on Dutch Lake and goes there with some staff from the Three Rivers Park District. So I think mainly we've facilitated and created the venues for some of those things, more so than actually delivered the programming, I think, in the past. But there's certainly some opportunities to look at kind of both angles of that.
My recollection is a lot of that is driven by the teachers,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's hit or miss depending on who has the personal interest to pull the kids out.
Orono Schools owns the property there on Classen Lake and does a lot of programming around that, the wetlands in the lake. Pond Lake, whatever it is, magical.
We actually had a consultant that worked with the district and school. I don't remember their name. But we did have Karen's, yes, thanks, Lois.
Wow.
That maintained those relationships with schools, and that was quite a while ago.
Mhm.
I think, and Bill's right, that, you know, there are a number of important, I'll call them celebrations, that occur within the district, and that are individual events sponsored by the cities and those kinds of things. And Aquatennial being probably the premier one. That's why I think if the district was to do something like this, that it would be important that it be something that is district-wide and be a watershed event rather than an individual event here and an individual event there. Yes, we have the cleanup, but I think, I don't want to speak for Tully, but the way it's been going, it is something that is expanding over time, and maybe the intent eventually is for it to be more of a watershed-wide event. It has the potential to grow to be that. But I think, for me, that should be a primary goal, is that it is a focus on a watershed, has a watershed perspective, rather than being, we have something in the upper lake and something in the lower lake. That, I don't think would be such a great idea.
Can I just check with him?
So I agree with you, and the only reason I was thinking that kind of with that paradigm of upper and lower is that I think something like a creek cleanup draws a different audience than something that is happening around standing water, and I could be absolutely wrong with that presumption, and the other piece is. So for every year when I've been at the cleanup, I've always gone either onto the creek right there at the park or onto Lake Hiawatha, and I've spent just time talking to people that I don't know, and have found that if there are families, they're disproportionately from Minneapolis. If they are single people, they're likely to come from all over. And the single people that I was talking to were finding out from REI or different organizations that are kind of geared towards bringing people together, whereas the families were learning about it from what you consider like a traditional source, community newspaper, radio, or a neighborhood newsletter, and I think those audiences would be nice to pull into pull in elsewhere, and maybe they happen simultaneously. Maybe it's like a bay cleanup or something of that nature. But it'd be nice to expand beyond just this area, and that's why I was kind of going down that path. differentiating between upper and lower watersheds.
I like the idea of aiming for something for our 50th.
Yeah.
It's a few years away, so it gives Kelly a chance to kind of build up to it.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the right way to thread it is. I would prefer to start next year so that we can learn some lessons for a 50th, if we were to go down that path.
Manager Robbins?
One thing that I envision when I hear you talking about something like this is some kind of a visual event that, somehow 50 hot air balloons rising over downtown Wayzata and going, but my wife and I were in Albuquerque, and we didn't know anything about the event. We opened up our blinds, and here are these balloons everywhere. Good
Shaped
Lord.
like cows.
Like a house. Yeah.
Pirate ships.
But if it's something that's big and splashy, and that you can take a photo of, that might be another dimension to it.
Well, the Aquatennial got rid of the milk carton boat race, so
So could
we
be ours.
we could take it on.
Probably won't make it all the way around Big Island, though.
That would be visual.
15 feet, they're all down.
And the divers rescuing
Would that
people.
constitute an internal load?
Yeah, that would be a definite load, yes. Just a kind of a couple thoughts is that I think that from a staff perspective, I think what would be helpful is really to define the outcomes rather than kind of getting down into the specifics of planning what an event would look like and who would come and all those things, is to try to better define what you're talking about and what you're looking for in the first place. And even prior to that, to get kind of a baseline of what we're already doing. Almost like Manager Olson mentioned, almost every community around Lake Minnetonka and off to Victoria and Maple Plain and these different places, they have community festivals. Every weekend of the summer is packed already. The calendar is full and sometimes over full. So in order to kind of integrate into that, we have some different options. If we wanted to have a signature watershed district event, we have to do that kind of bringing in some key strategic partners and maybe pilot some things, see what might work or go forward. But we're already out at a lot of those community events right now. And so I think before we even start kind of assessing how to do more or bigger or different, we kind of need to kind of catalog and make sure that we're all aware of what we're currently doing, because we have staff at events in Long Lake and at the Crappie Festival that was with Conservation Minnesota at Lord Fletcher's a few weeks ago, and we have something in Victoria. So we're already having kind of a booth and an educational presence at some of those events. So I think we should probably catalog what's already happening, and then we can look at seeing if there's a better way to make those higher profile, if kind of the goal is to raise and increase awareness and understanding of what a watershed is and what each community's place in the watershed means for that local audience. Or to your point, Jim, if it's better to look at kind of the watershed-wide type event where it's looking at kind of the context of the whole watershed. But I think just to kind of really identify and clarify those goals before we get too far into the community event planning process. I've been in one of those balloons in Albuquerque, not during the big huge festival, but in a smaller event, and it's pretty cool, and it's a lifelong memory. But it's trying to figure out, how does that fit in with what we're trying to do as a watershed? How does that fit in with the goals that we identify in our 10-year comprehensive plan and with our 2-track approach? How does that fit with it in everything else? And I think that I'm not saying that can't happen. In fact, I think it can happen. It can be pretty integrated pretty amazingly. But I think to kind of take that high-level approach and then figure out maybe some type of a time frame for planning or reimagining or piloting some of the opportunities.
Manager Shackleton?
Maybe I'll just take a stab at it. If I were to envision goals of an event, it would be to increase visibility, either by leveraging visual elements or fun elements. Another goal would be to increase the knowledge of BMPs so that people could implement them on their properties or in their daily lives. And another goal would be to leverage partners to support the previous two goals. And I guess maybe this is best done as a motion, but would be, I guess I would move to direct staff to attempt to achieve those goals by cataloging our existing practices and come back with a proposal for an event that could be executed next year, with the idea that it would be a learning event for a 50th anniversary event.
So that's a motion?
Yes.
Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Calkins?
I think the district is already doing that, and Telly has addressed that. I think next year is too soon. If it's going to be something that's significant. And I think that there does need to be a more in-depth discussion of what are, as Lars has articulated better than I, of what are the goals of doing this, and we each might have some that overlap and some that are different, but I think we have to have that framework hashed out and in place, and then build on that. And to have something next year would, I think, really be a strain to do something like that. Again, I think it's a great idea, but I think it would be jumping into something much too quickly, and as I envision it being a fairly grand scale, I don't think it would be done well either if it was something that happened next year. It takes a long time to put all the partners together and all the pieces together, and I think doing that in a year from now would be.
So if we remove the time frame of next year, I guess what I'm looking for is for staff to come back with an idea so that we can discuss it.
I think we have to lay out, and if you want to have staff do that, that's fine, but I think it should be a staff and a board, staff and a board process to get to that point of what are the parameters going to be, and what are the primary goals or reasons for doing it, and how big do we want it to be, and how much you want to spend on it, because that can take your 5% for next year all by itself. So I think easily. So I think that you have to have that discussion first. And I don't know that I would want to just throw that at staff without having buy-in in some fashion from the board on what those primary components might be.
Mr. Erdahl?
Kind of following up on Manager Calkins, is that I think that it almost requires some sort of a feasibility study, just like a capital investment program or project. Because I think that if you kind of start with the answer and then go ahead and try to plan it, that's kind of a difficult process. But if you kind of look at the landscape and do kind of a market study, do some audience research, do all the different types of things that would go into kind of putting together a package, and that's not free to do that process either. So that takes time and effort and money as well. I think that might be kind of more strategic way to approach it, and maybe either this could be kind of pursued on a regular basis in one of the current committees, or maybe there's even an ad hoc committee that's formed specifically for this purpose and/or for looking at 50th anniversary, events, or that might be broader than just the membership of staff and managers, and so there might be some different ways to look at that. But I guess I'd kind of concur with Manager Calkins that it's and I'm not trying to be a naysayer at all, because I think it would be cool if we could have a signature event that was kind of the Twin Cities Aquatennial type thing of this area. I think that would be awesome. But I think we need to figure out what are the outcomes that really are critical for that in terms of, and how those match up with our mission and plan.
I would like to say that I like the idea of a 50th anniversary committee. I've been keeping that in the back of my head anyway. I think that next year would be too soon. In terms of, I like the idea of letting it percolate and kicking it around, thinking about it. I don't, for example, see that visibility as an outcome. It might be a good thing. I'm not sure what to call it. I don't think it's an outcome. There could be other outcomes, though, and that would be a good discussion to have.
I like the idea of us having a discussion, but we need to have something to discuss. Yeah,
depends on what you mean by that.
What I've found professionally is that talking about things in the abstract gets no place. If you have a proposal to digest and to cut apart, you're more likely to create something that is feasible. We've had a really fun discussion about something in the abstract, and are coming to we can come to the conclusion of direct staff to come back with an idea, and then we can discuss that idea and manipulate it however we want. Or we can come to the conclusion of, let's just talk about this at some point in the future, because it might cost too much money and we don't know what the rest of the landscape looks like, and we don't have the capacity to do something next year. And I think it's incumbent upon us as managers to say, okay, staff, come back with a proposal. I'm willing to say not do an event next year, but staff come back to us with a proposal and have it be big, have it lay out, what the strengths are with the concept, what the weaknesses are, what you don't know, what you do know, what needs to be found, what needs to be discovered, and give us something to discuss. I think that's what we need to have.
Would you restate your motion? Let's see if we're ready to vote.
Are you asking that of me or of Louis?
I'm asking you to restate it. Well, Louis, you have it. Go ahead.
I'm willing to massage my initial motion.
No. I think he does need to massage it, otherwise.
Well, let's see what the motion is.
And
Madam Chair, the motion was to direct the staff to catalog existing events and propose an event in 2016 as a pilot or learning vehicle for a 2017 50th anniversary celebration.
And if I may, I'd like to amend that to remove the event next year, and can you read the second clause here?
An event as a pilot or learning event for a 2017 50th anniversary celebration.
2 years from now.
Yeah, year and a half. I like the first clause. I guess I would have the second clause be directing staff to come back with a proposal for a 50th anniversary event in 2015. Which leaves it vague, and I think our administrator has heard the breadth of our discussion, and whatever comes back we can dissect and analyze and massage.
Manager Calkins?
But the intent
is not for it to be a 50th in my mind. The intent is not for it to be a 50th anniversary celebration. To me, as I envision it, and as I understand we're talking about creating a signature event that would be inaugurated at the 50th anniversary.
I think I said that, didn't I?
No.
You missed my you missed my wink.
So it's
between the lines.
It's a different thing. And
Yeah.
and, you know, as soon as you talk about the difficulties of it, because it will be difficult, it sounds like you're throwing up barriers, and I don't think anybody here is throwing up
No.
barriers. I think it's it's a wonderful idea. I wouldn't. I think the district should have a 50th celebration of some kind. I'm even concerned that thinking about doing it in a year and a half.
I know, yeah.
It just is a tough row to hoe, to put it in horticultural terms. The time frame is short. And maybe it starts out small. That's fine. But again, I think that rather than just throwing it in the hands of staff, I think staff needs. I mean, I have in my mind an idea or of what it might, a concept of what it might be. I think that's a discussion we should have, and so that staff has that to work with, rather than coming and telling us, because if my idea of the concept isn't in there, I'd be disappointed. As would any of us. So I think we're jumping the gun a bit to take something as broad as let's have a signature event and throw that to staff.
Manager Shepherd.
So this is our, what, 8th year of the creek cleanup? And we've had 2,000 people last year, 2,000 people the year prior. Year one had 200 people. And I like the idea of a signature event. This Waterfest Ramsey Washington do, they're in year 15, 16. It's a big deal because it's been happening long enough that folks know to expect it. And I love the idea of a signature event, but I think that we start small, learn lessons, and grow. And the concept of an aquatennial would be great, but we're not the downtown council. We don't have their resources, and we don't have the staff of however many people they assign to pull that off. And I'm not thinking of I myself am not thinking of a multi-day event. I'm thinking of an event. Maybe a multi-day event is what something ends up being in 25 years. I don't know. And I think that if we're going to start the conversation with staff for a big event, there's never a great time to start it, but we're right before a budgeting process, and I think that's as good a time as any, because if they're going to put any effort and/or time into something, they need to budget for that.
I'm going to vote against your motion because it's too ill-defined to throw staff, too vague. It's too soon, too big, too much work to add on all at once. And I would like to, before I vote no, before I call the vote, offer as an alternative that we add this as a discussion item for the October retreat. That the board can think about it between now and then and come prepared to talk about what we might want to accomplish and what it might look like. Manager Brooks.
I'm practicing my parade wave.
Oh, that's a good one.
for the event. But I think waiting till October is way too late. I think I agree with you to a certain extent that it's a little vague, and I think, I agree with Jim that, perhaps we all have our own idea of what it could or should be, and perhaps we put it on our meeting at the end of the month here, where we're going to start talking about the budget. Have it be a specific item as part of that discussion on the 26th. that we're gonna start our budget discussion, and so to give it, so that we have, because I think it does need to be budgeted for this, at this time, for them to put it in their work plans, and because it is gonna come up really fast, so.
And you're seeing it's implemented in what year?
Well, probably the 20, I would like to start it as, you know, as an event, as part of our 50th anniversary year. You know, it seems like that makes the most sense to me.
Manager Shackleton?
My only opposition to starting in October is we've essentially missed the budget cycle, which means we've missed the planning cycle for the budget, which means if next year is way too early, we're pushing it out an additional year by not starting on the front end. I mean, I would have loved to have had this idea in February, but I think if we don't start the ball rolling, even with the nebulous goal or outcome, it's just going to get increasingly harder to start the ball rolling the longer we wait. And I'm sorry I don't have a concrete outcome. I really don't, other than I think we should start doing something over here.
Manager Calkins?
The only thing I was going to add is that it would be nice to do something as an inaugural event in 2017. And I don't know what that is, and it may not be a full-blown event, or it wouldn't be, because as we've seen with the cleanup, it's something that grows over time. To me, the important thing is that it be have a watershed-wide perspective, or watershed-wide involvement of some type. That, to me, is the most important criterion that would be assigned to something like this. So I think we should have the discussion before October, and I think staff will be well aware that there's an interest in doing something like this, and they'll be thinking about it. And we'll be able to come back and say, you know, this is a great idea, we can do this and this, but these are going to be the problems and things that we need to consider in that discussion. So I think the process has started. I think we just need to formalize it a little bit more sooner than October.
Are we ready to vote? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. There you go. Administrator's report, Mr. Erdahl.
Thank you, President White. Just a few quick updates.
Madam Chair, just for clarity's sake, it was Manager Shackleton's original motion that was just voted on?
Correct. The amendment version.
There was no amended?
No, it wasn't amended.
Having voted on the prevailing side, I'd like to recall the previous motion. And so the motion is to recall. Reconsider the previous.
Does that require a second? Is there a second? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
And Mr. Shackleton.
What you have is the amended motion.
It was for the staff to catalog existing community events and propose a signature annual event that would begin on the district's 50th anniversary for discussion by the board.
That would begin the district's 50th anniversary year. Or let me just ask: is it important to mention the 50th anniversary year?
Sure. I think so, yeah.
Yep.
So the planning will be in 2016?
Yes.
Okay. Just put it there potentially in the 50th anniversary year. That way you're not committed.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So potentially in the 50th anniversary year. Well, I'd like to move that. I'd like to move that amendment.
Okay.
For the most part.
Yeah, I just want to say, and you want to have a discussion by the board soon?
It'd have to be for work plans in
Yes,
2016.
it would have to be for work plans. I would leave that to staff to determine when it's best to bring a concept.
For the budget work plan process.
Yes.
And just as a point of clarification, I'm assuming that for the budget work plan process, you wouldn't have kind of a full finished proposal, but rather the planning proposal to study the feasibility and kind of the market research and all those types of things to address that. Okay.
Right.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
I'd second that motion. Ready to vote? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Now you amended the motion. That was an amendment.
Ah, yes.
Now, on the motion as amended,
Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
thank you.
Opposed? Thank you.
That's what we needed, your second, because it's an amendment.
Yeah.
So we got that taken care of. Thanks. Just a few quick updates. I'll kind of skim through these pretty quickly. Last week there was a meeting of the Hennepin Natural Resources Partnership. Manager White attended, as well as a few of our staff. They provided an overview of the Hennepin County's Natural Resource Interactive Mapping Tool and also their draft Natural Resources Strategic Plan, which is kind of in an ongoing process. Also last week, Dave Mant and I met with Dave Minch from Redpath, our auditor. We've been kind of set up a quarterly meeting process with them so that we can kind of track things as we're going along and kind of follow up to see if there's any kind of changes or adjustments as we go. And it makes the audit process, I think this was done last year also, and it made the audit process much more of a kind of a smooth operation last year, and we continue that now, and that's been useful for both sides. Manager White already mentioned that assuming that the special session will be completed, our lobbyist Joel Carlson is planning to provide a legislative update to the board at the workshop on July 9th. We also, and already mentioned the communication earlier today from Talia Mamayak about the nominations for the 2015 Watershed Heroes Awards. We're encouraging nominations from the public, our partners, CAC staff, and of course from all of you. And then there'll be a review towards the end of this month, meeting set up for that was also sent out today. Just as a little update on kind of an ongoing planning effort, the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board's ecological system plan process is kind of been put on hold for about a year, it sounds like, until early 2016. They wanted to refocus or to focus on some other kind of community planning efforts. And just to let you know that we have staff that are kind of plugged into that process on the Community Advisory Committee and also the Technical Advisory Committee, so we're tracking and watching that closely. And kind of a couple opportunities for staff and Watershed District recognition. Staff at Bowser requested that for the next month's snapshot that they'd like to feature the Mater Wetland Project in Minnetrista. And the reason that they asked for this to be included was it was a project that showcased how public entities are collaborating to assist landowners in restoring wetlands and also developing wetland banks. So that will be featured in the July 2015 snapshot from Bowser. And also, some of the planning staff have been involved with, will be involved with a presentation in late September for the American Planning Association Minnesota Conference in Bemidji. This will be in conjunction with our partners in Hopkins and St. Louis Park. The presentation that was kind of put together by Hopkins, but also kind of with participation from Watershed District and St. Louis Park, is titled Partners with Benefits, Water Resource Management as an Economic Development Tool. And this presentation was accepted and selected and will focus on the cooperative efforts along the Minnehaha Creek corridor and provide a great example of our efforts to leverage land use planning and economic development as vehicles to achieve ecological goals. So we're looking forward to that. And one other kind of late-breaking save the date for all of your calendars, if possible, is on Thursday, July 23rd, during the late morning, there will be a ribbon-cutting ceremony at Minnehaha Creek at the Reach 20 Boardwalk. So that will be, we're planning that in conjunction with St. Louis Park. We had a meeting just yesterday afternoon that kind of started looking at that date of Thursday, July 23rd. Later that day is the NEMO boat tour training program in the evening, so we don't have a meeting that evening, but this will be probably about 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning, still to be determined. And that's all. And then about 3 days after that, of course, is the creek cleanup on the 26th, Sunday the 26th. That's all I have.
Managers have signed up for the creek cleanup.
That I'm not sure about.
Okay.
I haven't, but I will be.
Was there a
What-
time for the ribbon cutting?
It's going to be probably either 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
And that's not firmed up yet.
Thank you.
Manager Calkins?
I just had a question about for the legislative session, and maybe Louis has the answer. I waded through the Ag and Environment Bill again, and primarily the buffer initiative, and as I read it, it would apply to everything within the watershed district. Does it not, because it's in the Ag bill? Or why doesn't it? I don't find anything in there that says who it applies to.
Madam Chair, Manager Calkins, I've spent time with it on behalf of the Red River watershed people who are looking at it quite closely. It will not apply anywhere in which there is an MS4 permit. That's an exception that's carved out, which essentially means that most of the metro area won't have this buffer requirement at all. And it is really largely was conceived as a way in which municipalities feeling burdened with stormwater obligations want to see agriculture share in the process. And so that was one big exception that was carved out.
Well, that's what I focused on, is the exceptions to the rule, because I thought there was going to be a very clear exception in there, and it's not at all clear.
Well, it just says that
and I'm
if
sure the
you're-
general public has no clue.
If you're in a community that has an MS4 permit, you are accepted. So in our watershed, that means everyone.
Thanks.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.